Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football State of the Program for the South Carolina Gamecocks football program. It's no secret. Like the South Carolina fans kind of know where the boys sit regarding South Carolina and what the future of this program looks like. There's a couple of different conversations you want to have when you're evaluating where a football program is, right? It starts with on the field play, right? Wins and losses. That's how a head coach gets evaluated. That's how a football program gets evaluated. I think to the South Carolina fans and largely the college football fans who follow the intricacies of the sport, there are also a couple of different conversations you have to have. It starts with wins and losses. You look at talent acquisition. You look at player development. Though one of the more important conversations I think we should have is what the coaching staff looks like. You look at, hey, what do Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, some of the greats of college football from a head coaching standpoint, what do they all have in common? They hire elite staffs around them. What does South Carolina's coaching staff look like? I think it's sneakily becoming one of the better coaching staffs that you see in the country. Want to get into some of these conversations, talk about where South Carolina sits, not only just heading into 2025, but where this program is going as a whole over the next 5 to 10 years. Fired up to get into it. Before we do, and as always, to the South Carolina fans, number one, it's no secret we've had a blast talking this football team from a recruiting trail, transfer portal. The amount of support the South Carolina fans have shown to the boys has been amazing. Can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, one of the best ways that you can evaluate where a program is kind of hearing from the South Carolina Gamecock fans themselves. I mean, that's what I'm really interested in. So South Carolina fans, let it fly in the comment section. I think we can learn a lot from you guys in terms of where we think this South Carolina football team is going. Dill, without further ado, let's get into this one. Let's start with on the field play, right? That by far the most important conversation when you're evaluating a head coach or when you're evaluating a football program. You look at Shane Beamer wrapping up year 4, consistently getting the most out of his football teams. Outside of the 2023 season, I feel like the South Carolina Gamecocks team has overperformed every single year. That's what stands out to me. And secondly, it's clearly going in the right direction from a wins and losses column. How do you grade out this South Carolina team in terms of on-field performance the last couple of years?
And this is where I think he's kind of shined. Like, I think A- is kind of where I have him. I think in terms of like being on schedule with the rebuild of this program, because it really is a rebuild.
Yeah.
I mean, where he took it from, they were kind of down in the dumps. And I look at the way he's been able to win some of those big games, that Tennessee game, a couple of games against Clemson, like against those top dog teams. Like, again, he's had some games that certainly don't look great, but like, you look at kind of the body of work. I mean, it's not just him beating the teams he should beat, never winning. But like, I think he's put this team in position to win a lot of big games. And you look at where they are in 24, and especially where they could be in 2025 in terms of, or like just a pure talent standpoint. This is a team that I think should expect to be in the playoffs next year.
Two things that stand out to me when you're grading South Carolina out on the football field. They're just coming off a 9-4 year where in the month of November, I was banging the table for the South Carolina team to get into the college football playoffs because there were not many teams that looked more dangerous on the football field than South Carolina in the month of November. Then you kind of take an early look at the 2025 year. I think we both have them as a top 10 team in the country going into 2025. The last thing I'll note is they are clearly closing the gap. Right, you bring Shane Beamer in South Carolina, kind of a middle of the pack SEC team, and you say we bring Shane Beamer in to kind of get us to that upper echelon where we're not only competing with some of the best teams in the SEC and in the country, we are competing for SEC championships. And you can see South Carolina working their way up to that spot within the SEC pecking order. That's what stands out to me the most. I mean, you very well could have beaten that LSU team. Very well should have beaten that LSU team. Very well could have beaten that Alabama team, arguably should have as well. You noted their success against Clemson. They are closing the gap between some of the best teams in the country. That's what stands out to me the most.
And now you're starting to see it. It's like it felt like the first couple of years, like when they beat Tennessee in 22 and Clemson in 22, like those were games you felt like they were punching a little bit above their weight. That I almost like put more on like Shane Beamer rallying the troops and being able to get more out of a team than the head coach on the opposing sidelines. Because I look, that Tennessee team in 2022 and probably that Clemson team as well, both arguably more talented than what South Carolina was trotting out there. In South Carolina, obviously, he's still able to win those games. So you look at like his ability to elevate his players and get them rolling. That's where it gets interesting, especially if he can crank the talent acquisition side up a little bit.
Which is a nice segue to the talent acquisition conversation. Because, early in Shane Beamer's tenure, it was kind of like out-coaching, like kind of outperforming your talent level. We're getting to a point where South Carolina is more talented than some of these teams at the top of the SEC, at least in my opinion, especially when you look at the quarterback position. How have we gotten here? A couple of things that stand out. South Carolina's, and talent acquisition, didn't spell it with a T. That's unacceptable. Two things that stand out. Most notably, I love what they're doing along the lines of scrimmage. They are stacking blue chip talent. And you talk about one of the reasons I'm most excited about South Carolina in 2025. This is the year where I think, landing guys like Tree, Josiah Thompson, or potentially a guy like Marky Anderson, Trevon Baugh, Cam Pringle. This is the year where it pays off. You've done a really, really good job recruiting the offensive line. That's going to pay off in 2025, at least in my opinion. Secondly, Dill, the evals have been really good. Like a guy like LaNorris Sellers, not a ton of P4 interest from him coming out of high school. Really tradesy cat that just wasn't an elite quarterback coming out of high school. Shane Beamer says, hey, give me all those traits. I'll make him a good quarterback. That's clearly going into 2025. And then how they balance, and this is a really important conversation, how are you balancing recruiting the high school ranks, using the transfer portal, and retaining your talent? Phenomenal job retaining their talent going into 2025, doing a really good job routinely bringing in top 20 classes on the high school ranks, top 20 classes in the transfer portal. To me, that really good blend is really helping South Carolina put out, top end talent level SEC team, or a top 10. That's probably not the best way to phrase it. Really talented football teams going forward over the next couple of years.
And that's the part that, frankly, I think can really turbocharge this program, because it's like when you talk about evals on the recruiting trail, is it evals or is it player development? It's really hard from the outside to be able to split those apart, because right now I think you're seeing a lot of South Carolina being able to take probably slightly less talented guys than a team like even like a Florida or a Georgia has, and being able to elevate them and get them playing that type of ball, if you will. Alabama, like those type of teams that are recruiting at a slightly higher level, it feels like, than South Carolina. But now with South Carolina's success and more of a proof of concept and more stability, where Shane Beamer is kind of going to be the guy, it feels like he's more locked in. I do wonder if they can start pushing for top 10 classes, and especially the fact that they've been able to take over the state. I think that's one big thing where I look like their ability to kind of bump South Carolina, or Clemson, I should say, off the state of South Carolina and really own it and lock their borders down. I think will be really interesting going forward, and seeing if they can really take their talent acquisition up, which has been good, and Shane Beamer's made it better than what it was. But I still think that's a place where they have room to improve a little bit.
You're coming off the 9-4 year. You got a great chance at making the college football playoffs in 2025. This South Carolina program as a whole is, at least in my opinion, as just a casual college football fan sitting on my couch, appears to be one of the more exciting programs that you see across the country. I'm kind of with you. Like, what does it look like if South Carolina can parlay the success they are having on the football field to the recruiting trail and bump up that talent to the next level? That's probably what excites me.
And that's why 2025 feels like a huge year.
Big.
Now it's like you look,
stack
and they've been good. Now can you put like a real, put yourself on the map where you're not looked at as the underdog anymore? You're looked, oh, I'm not surprised to see South Carolina up here. Like, this is kind of where they belong, because there has been that element of, I don't want to say the plucky underdog, but that has been
100%.
At times for South Carolina. I think when you go to be in the battles for those big 5 stars in South Carolina, they certainly win theirs. They get Dylan Stewart, Nick Harbor, those type of guys. They've been able to win them, but winning them more consistently, I think, has something to do with you being a program that you pretty much know year in and year out is going to be in the thick of things for the playoffs.
Yeah, and so then the next step is player development. You see teams recruit really well, don't develop their players the right way, don't really matter. This is, in my opinion, arguably the most impressive aspect about the South Carolina team right now, and you saw it so clearly in 2024. Nick Harbor clearly was getting better as a quarterback. This offensive line clearly getting better over the course of the 2024 year. The pass catchers, headlined by Nick Harbor, clearly getting better. And then you scroll down to the defensive side of the football. You talk about guys like Dylan Stewart coming in and dominating. I look at South Carolina from a player development standpoint. And again, LaNorris Sellers got all the national media attention in terms of him getting better. I don't think it was a coincidence that LaNorris Sellers was getting better as the offensive line was starting to play better. Josiah Thompson, Casey Henry played some really good football in the month of November. Nick Harbor was emerging as that dynamic, freaky difference maker that we knew he was. And now he's going to skip the track and field season in spring, focus on football, which he's never done in his lifetime. The player development is there in a big way for South Carolina.
And that's where I think you look at what's kind of brought this program back, if you will. It has been that. It has been the ability. Like, you look at their depth chart, it doesn't exactly look like a Georgia or like an Alabama littered with 4- and 5-star guys, but like, they are getting so much out of certain players. And you look at, and you said it, like, his ability to revamp, if you will, both sides of the line of scrimmage. I mean, they created a really dominant defensive line last year. The offensive line, yeah, it had its growing pains early, but it got good. Like, that has been the most impressive thing about what Shane Beamer's done. And that, again, it all feeds into that ability to kind of create a real dominant program. Guys, look, I mean, how can you look at that program and say this isn't a place where I can just thrive? Because
especially in the SEC, you talk about you want to be a team that wins 10 football games consistently in the SEC. You have to get the line of scrimmage play right. And South Carolina fans know this more than anybody because they've had some really bad defensive lines. They've had some really bad offensive lines. It doesn't matter the talent around it. If you cannot compete at the highest level along the line of scrimmage, if you can't look like teams like Alabama, Georgia, now Texas along the lines of scrimmage, you ain't going to be that consistent of an SEC team. Getting the trenches right has been huge. And I think you credit a lot to that from the player development side of things. Coaching staff, Dill, like kind of doing some prep to get this episode going. I mean, Clayton White as your DC, Sterling Lucas. Is there anybody in the country who's coaching edge rushers better than what Sterling Lucas did in 2024? You continue to look through it. Torian Gray at the defensive backs. Here's another one. We use the word coaching staff. I would probably use just football staff in general because player personnel and that front office side of things really, really important too. They land Oregon's director of player development, Darren Usher, going into the 2024 year. He's a gem. Nobody's going to talk about him. Not a huge national media name. Getting the front office right in terms of managing your depth chart, becoming very important. What he did in this offseason, retaining all that talent and then going and making some really impact additions in the transfer portal, it was not necessarily the flashiest transfer portal for South Carolina in terms of new players coming in, although I'm a fan of some of the guys they have. Their ability to keep everybody, a guy like Tree, who probably should be starting, didn't start in 2024, him, Trevon Baugh, Marquis Anderson, keeping those guys within your program who might not necessarily be playing, but you kind of know are going to play a role. The coaching staff from the on-the-field coaches to the front office, I think is firing on all cylinders for South Carolina going into 2025.
And you think in his tenure, the only real bad miss was Satterfield. And Satterfield now has gotten 2 offensive coordinator jobs, both at South Carolina and then subsequently at Nebraska, where you look, he has not done a good job. So that was probably the only miss, I feel like, in terms of what Shane Beamer's done. But Clayton White's been dynamite. I mean, I look at what he's done with that defense, how he's transformed them into a unit that isn't just a good unit, but a unit that is really impactful, can take the ball away, creates a lot of negative plays. Like, obviously, even with the guy at App State now, I'm blanking.
Yeah, Dowell Loggins did a great job.
Awesome hire in the way he was able to bring the LaNorris Sellers kind of to the forefront of college football. Like, he has, again, made a mistake with Satterfield, corrected it quickly, and you saw it was really took this program off, and they played really, really well.
You know you got a good coaching staff when you got guys who are getting head coaching jobs, right? And Dowell Loggins. And also, I mean, we covered a lot of coaching searches over the last couple of weeks. Saw a lot of South Carolina names as candidates for other P4 jobs. That's when you know you're doing a good job. And South Carolina doing a good job retaining their coaches as well, which is important too. Trajectory, pretty clear. I mean, you're coming off a 9-4 season. you, at least in my opinion, look to be at the, if you are pessimistic on South Carolina, you might have them as the 15th team in the country. If you're optimistic like myself, you have them as top 10. You are perennial or thought of as a top 15 team in the country going into 2025. It's clear this program's going in the right direction. Dill, it's one of the more fun teams to do the state of the program because it's so clear where South Carolina is going, at least in my opinion. We'll sign out there. Would love to hear how the South Carolina fans are feeling about where the program sits. Again, not only going into 2025, but over the next couple of years. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.